Jager and Ducain Mysteries, Chapter 2, The Harrow Historical Society. It was a long ride to the location marked in the journal, and Jager did not mind the company one bit. Detective Jenny Ducain was around 25 or so, about half his age to be exact. That was okay. He didn't think of her in a sexual way. Attractive, yes, but more like a daughter he never got to have, since his own wife had left him 5 years ago, saying he loved the job more than he ever loved her. There was more truth to that than not. Thus he has been married to his badge ever since. Harrow was one of those old mining boom towns that converted into lumber and steel production out of necessity once the silver ran dry back in 1929. How the town discovered and acquired that silver is a rather sinister story for another time. "Hey, Ducain, do you remember the Mick Dalton case?" he asked, keeping his grey wolf-like eyes on the road, trying his best to bond. Plus it was a long and monotonous drive to St. Raphael's Church. "Yes, of course. That was a really weird one. He killed a reporter and his ex-girlfriend, then blamed it all on some wraith at Harrow Hall. I worked on that one with you, remember?" She answered, with a devilish twinkle in her emerald eye, and a rude smile on her lips, even as it dripped in a sardonic tone. Okay, no need for sarcasm, rookie. But this case does remind me of it. The way the shop owner was supposed to be so nice to everyone, and then all of a sudden, bang! He goes nuts and kills 2 innocent people, and then himself with no rhyme or reason to it. Don't get me wrong, that Mick was no saint, but even with the evidence stacked against him, he still pleaded his innocence. Yeah, I mean, it was clear to me that he killed them. But those times when we interviewed him... All of a sudden, Detective Ducain grabbed the wheel of the car and pulled it hard to the left, almost crashing into an oncoming vehicle in the next lane, as a mass of white and red flew over the hood of the cruiser. The incensed driver of the other vehicle let out their shock and irritation in a loud, long blast from the car's horn, no doubt letting out a loud scream of curse words along with the hooting. "What the hell was that?" Jager shouted, his hands gripping hard on the wheel and correcting their position. Ducain turned her head to look behind her, and saw nothing. Nothing that could explain the swirling shape that flew over the car. "Didn't you see that?" she asked, her voice an octave higher than she would have liked it to be. "No, I didn't see anything. All I saw was you grabbing the wheel and nearly taking out that car next to us. What the hell is wrong with you?" Ducain looked out of the passenger window to see a family of 4, clearly distressed by nearly being in a fatal car accident. She looked out of the rear-view mirror. Still nothing there. "I could have sworn I saw a red and white ball or something." Ducain grew more defensive. Whether it was to herself or to her partner was wide open for debate. Jager looked at her, confusion and frustration clearly etched on his lined face. "A red and white ball? Seriously? When was the last time you took a vacation?" "I know what I saw, Jager. I know I saw something," she protested earnestly. Jager clenched his teeth tight, only letting out a grunt in answer. The detectives drove the rest of the way in a heavy silence. When they finally got to the journal's marked location, they discovered it to be an old, run-down, deconsecrated church hall. However, it was still a good place for group meetings and social events. The detectives, still disgruntled from Ducain's bizarre behavior on the road, disembarked from the cruiser after parking it in the hall's lot, making a mental note of just how many cars were currently parked alongside. It was a clear half-dozen or so. Depending on carpooling, that could mean anywhere between 6 or a dozen or more individuals. Despite the heaviness of the silence still hanging between them, Jager and Ducain took care to at least appear as the professionals they were, and entered the church to see a group of variously aged townfolk who were just starting some sort of meeting. Detective Ducain looked at the large banner in an alcove prior to entering the hall proper that read, "The Harrow Historical Society, telling the history behind the urban legends of Harrow." She nudged Jager in the ribs with her elbow and nodded towards the sign. Jager took one look at the sign, sighed, then whispered, "Oh, great. History nerds." Looking around the room, he saw that this old church had been only slightly changed from its previous incarnation. All the altars were still there, though dusty and unused. Even the first 3 rows of pews were intact. But the rest had been removed, and a large rectangular table was put in their place. At the table were 6 people, 4 men, 2 women, and 1 empty chair. The group chatted indistinctly amongst themselves. The guards seemed to rise as soon as they noticed 2 outsiders coming towards them. The tapping of the detective's shoes echoed around the room as they both approached the circle of people. Jager turned to the group and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Detective Anthony Jager, homicide. This is Detective Jenny Ducain. We are investigating the murder-suicide of a married couple and a local pawn shop owner. We found an address book with this place's location and the time of this meeting in it. The man who owned the book was called..." Jager looked into his own notebook to recall the name. "Turner. Simon Turner. Is that name familiar to any of you?" The group looked stunned and very upset hearing this news. 1 or 2 amongst the group instantly broke down in tears. One looked so shocked that Jenny was convinced the man was on the brink of a stroke. Jager read the room's despair and quickly added, "I'm very sorry for your loss, but we need to ask you some questions." "What questions?" barked an ancient-looking man with deep creases in his face. He narrowed his silver eyebrows at both detectives. "How well did you know Mr. Turner?" Ducain asked broadly. "He was a member of the HS, just like us." The voice came from the back. It was the younger of the 2 women. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. The other woman looked to be around her mid-40s. "He was quite a reserved sort of man," answered one of the group. "Okay, anything else?" asked Jager, scanning the room for any willing volunteer to simply tell them something helpful. Anything helpful. "Yes, but Simon was cooler than any of us." This was a man to her left. "Yeah, he got the information on the history of Harrow most of us had never even heard of," said the older man. Detective Ducain stepped in front of the group. "What do you mean?" "Simon did what we all do. He found the truth about the few urban legends when no one else could. For instance, I bet you know the legend of the Harrow silver mine." "Of course. We all know that one. It's about the ghost of a Native American that the founder of his town tried to rescue from a rock slide," Ducain interrupted. "That's the one." The old man nodded eagerly, then added in a conspiratorial tone, "Well, did you know that it was in fact the founder himself that caused the rock slide in the first place? He was trying to mine for silver on land that wasn't even his at the time. So they simply took it, like most men armed to the teeth with a power lust, an addiction to control over everything they see." The young man jumped in. "Yeah, John Harrow and his militia attacked the local tribe, who retreated under the caves of Bear Hill. Once they got into those caves, the townspeople blew the entrance shut, entombing their warriors and their families inside to starve to death." The older woman then spoke up. "Simon did the best of all of us, because he was borderline obsessive-compulsive." She gave a withering look to the younger guy as she said this. What actually happened to Simon? Adjusting an old pair of reading glasses on her nose as she asked. Jager looked at her. His wolf-grey eyes softened. He was involved in a double homicide. The shock of these words hit the group instantly, and the protests rang out like machine gun fire. "No way!" exclaimed one of the male members of the group in a high pitch. "What the hell are you talking about?" another member threw in, shaking her shaggy brown head in disbelief. "Please, everyone, calm down and talk about this in a civil matter. We will help you understand, but we need answers as well." Jager took swift command of the room. If he didn't do so now, this seemingly studious group would become ugly. It was always the quiet, bookish sorts that lost their shit. Turner's blasting the Becks and then capping himself in the head was testament to this. Before he lost the pause in their protests, Jager quickly rambled out questions, as if firing a shotgun. "Can you tell me if anyone of you know the Mr. Stan Beck or his wife, Selma? And why Mr. Turner, Simon, might have had any interaction with the couple outside his pawn shop? Did he perhaps have a reason to hold a grudge, or nurse some other personal resentment towards Mr. Beck or Mrs. Beck? That's something that would cause Simon to shoot them." "Simon would never do that." A third man in a tweed suit barked in denial. Another one, with a red cap, kept quiet. Very quiet. "You all seem very sure of that. I know all of you are shocked by this news," said Detective Ducain, trying to calm and diffuse the sharply rising anger in the room. "Help us find some answers to understand Mr. Turner, Simon." The older woman spoke again, this time in a much clearer, colder tone. "Simon was hyper-rational. Do you know what that means? He thought everything through. He was meticulous in every aspect of his life, and he would never do anything so rash as to kill anyone or himself." "What if they got to him?" said the young man. "Who are they?" asked Jager. "We don't know, but it got him in a very weird state. I've never seen Simon act like that. He told us he was on to some big find, but what that was, he would not even tell us," the young man explained sheepishly. The man in his 60s then spoke up again. "Look, we've told you all we know. Please find out who really did this to those people. And as for Simon, he didn't do this. I'm sure of that. Go look at his apartment." The man reached into his back pocket and brought out a set of keys and tossed them to Jager. "Those are his spares. I water his plants when he's away. He had Turner's keys, in case the coppers got any funny ideas." "What of Mr. Stan and Selma Beck? Do their names ring a bell?" Jager pressed. It was a long shot, but a shot not taken is a shot not risked. Thus no answers to the motive. Why had Simon Turner killed the Becks? There was a collective pause within the group, all of them looking at one another, not in a hushed conspiracy, but in a unified attempt to try and recall if their dead friend and colleague had ever spoken of the couple. After a few heartbeats, each of the gathered 6, almost in unison, shook their heads in the negative. The man in the tweed suit actually apologized for their lack of illumination on the subject. None of them knew of either person. But then again, They didn't know very many of Simon's customers. If it didn't concern the history of Harrow, or the urban myths that circled the small town, it didn't interest the Harrow Historical Society. The two detectives thanked the group for their help, which wasn't very helpful at all, and left. But they figured that they weren't going to get anything useful out of the circle of eccentrics.